It's part of my continuing education to pull my head out of my arse when it comes to issues of race. Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. Today I'm going to wrap up January, which actually was a really good reading month for me. I read 9 books in January, 3 of which were 5 stars and all the rest were 4 stars, so pretty good, especially considering my month did not get off to a strong start. I was a bit schlumpy with life in general, but also with my reading at the start of the month, but I've picked it up. And I think I talked about this last week in my February TBR video, but books at the moment are what's getting me through, because in Scotland, as the rest of the UK, we are in lockdown at the moment. Doesn't seem to have an end in sight anytime soon, and with lockdown comes homeschooling, and actually we're doing a lot better this time around than we did in the first lockdown, but the volume of work the school is sending is a lot more than it was in the first lockdown, which means I'm struggling to fit my own work in, and I've got some really big projects and deadlines at the moment, and just, you know, all the pressures of everyone being in the house all together, living on top of each other a bit. So it's been a month. But let's talk about the books. I've split this wrap up into 2. So today I'm going to be talking about the older backlisty titles that I read in January, and then on Wednesday you'll be getting a little bonus video where I talk about the new releases that I read in January. So I do hope you'll join me for that one as well. But for now, let's see what I read from my bookcase. My first 5-star read was one of the books I'm reading for what I'm terming Project Everlasting Love, where I'm rereading books that I've rated 5 stars in the past. I don't really ever reread, so this is a little bit of an experiment for me to see, firstly, whether I enjoy rereading books that I've read before, but also to see if my tastes have changed, whether I still love these books a second time around. And so my first 5-star read was The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. I first read this in 2017 and it was pretty much love at first chapter. I think it had me in tears by about page 14, and I've held it in really high regard ever since. I was a little bit nervous that my opinion would change, which was a bit silly, seeing as I read her new release of short stories towards the end of 2020 and absolutely adored that, to the point where it's actually one of my favourite short story collections of all time. And so, you know, I think it goes without saying that this absolutely held up on a reread. So this is a story about 2 people who are linked by a book. It opens with Leo Gursky. He is a grumpy, lonely octogenarian. He's a Polish immigrant who left Poland during the Second World War to escape the Nazis and came to America. And during that time, he lost not only his entire family, but also the girl that he loved. She had emigrated to America before him, and for reasons that I won't get into because I don't want to spoil anything, when he comes to America, they can no longer be together, and he is heartbroken. She's the only woman that he has ever loved his whole life, and even 60 or so years later, she is still very much in his thoughts. Our second character is a teenage girl called Alma. Her father has recently passed away. Her mother is really grieving this loss. Her younger brother has turned to like religious fanaticism, maybe as a coping method, I don't know, but to kind of escape these things going on in her home life, she decides to track down the woman who inspired a book which her father gave her mother, which is full of outpourings of love and from which she got her name. I love both Leo and Alma. I think they are really strong characters, and I absolutely love how their separate stories unfold and then come together. There's so much sadness in this book. The sadness isn't just confined to Alma and Leo. There's kind of a sadness to every character in this book, but at the same time, it's not a gloomy read. It's got a wit and warmth to it that drew me in again on rereading. Both Leo and Alma have a really unique way of dealing with their own grieving and situations that completely pulled at my heartstrings. The emotions I felt the first time on reading it were there this second time. I really love how the different fibres of the story are woven together, particularly that of the book within the book, which is also called The History of Love. And I couldn't put this down. I just love this book. And then I will stick with my rereading project and talk about my next 5-star read, which is The Snow Child by Ivey. Eowyn Ivey. I still haven't managed to figure out how to pronounce her name. So I first listened to an audiobook version of this story back in 2013. And then last year, when I was in a charity shop, I saw this absolutely gorgeous cover and had to have it. And so it only made sense that it made its way back onto my TBR. So this is the story of Jack and Mabel, who have left everything they know to try and make a go of it as homesteaders in Alaska. And after a tragic stillbirth 10 years ago, they're feeling the strain of that ambition because they've got no extra hands to help. Jack's having to work all hours trying to get the homestead to a level where it can start to be self-sufficient, and Mabel is struggling with the isolation. And as their second winter in Alaska looms, things do not seem to be going well for Jack and Mabel. But in an uncharacteristic moment of levity, they find themselves building a snowman, or a snow girl, as the first winter snows fall. The next morning, the snow girl has vanished, but they spot a small child running through the forest. As they build her trust in them, they begin to form a relationship with this girl, and she becomes part of their lives, but only in winter. So is she the child of nearby settlers? Is she a fairy tale come to life? Or has cabin fever set in? And what it was about the book that caught me and lured me in the first time around was still what kept me hooked on a second reading, and it's the beauty and severity of the Alaskan wilderness. It's brought to complete pine smelling, ice cracking, cold, raw beauty right on the page in this book. And although we follow Jack and Mabel through all the seasons, it's really the description of Alaska in the winter that really I find so captivating in this book. And this time around, the fact that I was reading it when it is cold outside and I spent most of my reading time snuggled up under a blanket, it made me feel like I was in my own Alaskan log cabin and made it all the more of an enjoyable experience. I also really love the characters in this book. Both Jack and Mabel go on their own individual journeys in how they cope with the Alaskan wilderness, how they cope with their new lives, how they develop their relationship with each other, and also how they heal from the loss of that child 10 years ago. And there's also a fabulous character in Esther, who is their friend. She is a powerhouse. I was smiling every time that woman was on the page. So the setting and the characters would be enough to make this a really incredibly enjoyable read. But then you add the element of the snow child to it and the mystery of who she is and her ethereal otherworldliness, and it just elevates this book into something absolutely stunning. And I think something that's often put me off rereading is I'm not the sort of person that will look at the end of a book before I start it. I really do like a resolution of a story to come as a bit of a surprise, and so I've always felt with rereading that element's taken away from the experience. But, you know, with this, I was still left speechless with the ending the second time around. And this time I actually took something different from it. I don't know if it's what the author intended, but I found it quite a powerful statement about the responsibilities of women and the dangers of taming something that really should be left flourishing in the wild. So no spoilers, but that was just my take on it. I would love to know if you've read this book and if you felt the same. And then the first 4-star read that I want to talk about was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Renie Eddo Lodge. I've been meaning to read this for a wee while now, so I'm really glad that I finally got around to it. It's part of my continuing education to pull my head out of my arse when it comes to issues of race. I've always claimed not to be racist purely because my personal morality is based on trying not to be prejudiced against anyone for any number of reasons. But it's through reading books like this that I've come to realise that personal moral codes are really just the sprinkling on top of the systemic ingrained racism that white people are born into and exist within. Although having said that, I can guarantee it's a damn sight more comfortable than being on the receiving end of the white supremacist society that we live in. So I loved that this book is from a British perspective. The other books that I've read so far on the subject of race have all been from an American perspective. And if 2020 showed us anything, it's that the belief that Britain is not racist, or at the very least is not as racist as America, is a complete lie. But it's still the prevailing belief that is shouted really loudly over the top of any evidence to the contrary. In this book, Renie Eddo Lodge has structured her arguments around so many different facets of, well, mostly lives in general, but specifically to Britain. She's done so in a really clear way that uses both research and anecdote to make her arguments, to deconstruct elements of society that many people would claim are untouched by racism or impenetrable to criticism. The main one clearly being the police, but she also tackles other issues such as feminism as well and looks at intersectionality. And I found that particular chapter really, really interesting. Quite infuriating, but really interesting. And I think it's important to say things like, I used to feel my hackles rise when the term white people was used to talk about all white people. I used to kind of rail against it and be like, well, I'm not one of those white people, but I am becoming more aware of the fact that my belief in that was because I simply was not hearing enough Black voices. We are all those white people. I think in particular the opening of this book will be quite polarizing. So this is where Renie Eddo Lodge talks about the blog post of the same title that kicked off a lot of discussion and was ultimately the precursor to her writing this book. I think there will be people who refuse to hear what she's saying, and I think there will be others who cringe at recognizing themselves at whatever point of their journey of understanding the race issues in this country and in the world in general. Because if you're white, you have been one of those people at some point in time. If you're in that second cringing group, then this book is really perfect for you. It will help you continue your learning. If you're in the first group, you should still read this book and then go back and read that introduction and see whether you are still denying it or whether you are now cringing in recognition. This is a really powerful book. And then I'm going to move on to my 4-star read, which is already back on my shelf. and it was The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. I've been meaning to get to this for a while after reading her short story collection, The Interpreter of Maladies, back in 2019. That blew me away, and I was interested to see how she would come across in a novel. I will say, although I've given this 4 stars, it's maybe more of a 3.5. Is that? I don't know, I can't decide. I know for definite I did prefer The Interpreter of Maladies. That was a definite 5-star read. This is quite a quiet and slow book, which I do really like, which is why I'm struggling between the 3.5 and the 4, but in a way that short stories can't be. So I think I preferred her in short format, but that does not mean that this isn't a good book. This is the story of a Bangladeshi couple, Ashok and Ashima, who emigrate to the United States after their arranged marriage, and we join them as they are setting up a life and community for themselves as they become parents. The story then switches focus a bit more to their firstborn son, Gogol, who is named after a Russian writer who meant a lot to his father. And we watch him as he comes into adulthood and struggles with his identity, not just as a first-generation Indian American, but also with what he feels are the shackles of his name, and as he kind of tries to reinvent himself and free himself from that. This is the kind of book that I think that while nothing happens, everything happens. I don't know if that makes sense. What I mean by that is that although there are no big plot twist, no dramatic climax, not even really a definitive ending to the story, we are watching an entire existence of a family, of a man unfold. And I think that might be one of my favourite tropes in fiction. I'm fascinated by people, by families, by the immigrant experience, by anyone who lives a different life to me. And this story is told in such a natural way that you really do feel like a fly on the wall. And for me, what I enjoyed most about that was the insight it gave me into Bangladeshi lives. Set mainly in the US around, I think it's Connecticut. I've always struggled with that ever since reading The Babysitter's Club as a kid, and got it into my head that it was Connecticut instead of Connecticut. Sorry, total tangent. Yeah, so it's set around that area of the US, but there are some sections that are set in Calcutta as well, and I really enjoy learning about other cultures. And also things like the courage to uproot your lives, leave behind everything you know, your family, your friends, and move to a completely different country that's a complete unknown to you. And in the case of this story, with a person who is a complete unknown to you, is just something I don't think I will ever tire of reading about. But what elevated these elements for me is Lahiri's writing. She carries you along, and considering the scope of the lives that we're covering in this book, and it's not very long either, it never feels like you're being bombarded. It never feels like an uphill struggle. She's really good at picking out the pivotal moments or reckonings that pull the story forward. Particularly, I'm thinking of Gogol's experience of where his two cultural identities intersect. I've seen some reviewers on Goodreads, and importantly, some of these are Bangladeshi people themselves, complain that there are too many stereotypes in this book. Gogol's father is an engineer, he works at a university, his mother is a housewife who stays at home. However, from a personal point of view, as someone who is not from a Bangladeshi background, those so-called stereotypes really helped me to see the characters. And I also think that all of the characters in this book have got enough going on in their own storyline that sets them apart from any of them ever becoming a stereotype. Also, considering the time when it is set, Ashok and Ashima are probably some of the first Indian people that a lot of Americans would have. Jeez, why can't I talk today? The first Indian people that a lot of Americans would have encountered, And that's sort of where stereotypes come from. So they were the mold in which those stereotypes were formed. So I don't think it's a negative thing that they do more fully conform to them than some readers would like. It would have been nice to see them break out of those stereotypes, but in the same breath, I also think that these characters are doing as much as they could to find their feet in a new country or with two separate cultural identities, that they were doing enough to break that mold as it was for the time that the book is set. So I've just realised after it being so dark that I've got all my lights on, the sun has now come out and is kind of doing some sort of weird thing in the middle of my setup here, but I don't care, okay? So those were the backlist titles that I read in January, all really solid, good books. If you want to hear about the new releases that I read in January, then look out for a bonus video on Wednesday when I will be talking about those. I hope your January went okay, all things considered. If it didn't, it's a new month, clear the slate, let's just be kind to ourselves and keep doing what we can do. If you're homeschooling like me, just remember that if you miss a few lessons, your kids will not fall behind. This is an unprecedented time, as we're told all the time. And so just cut yourself a little bit of slack and curl up with a good book and a nice cup of coffee. And so until Wednesday, bye. Such beauty. I don't feel that.